Twelfth Night is also known as the 12th day of Christmas, which in Shakespeare's day was a day to sort of let off steam. Um, Traditionally, this was party time, when the masters would throw a party, and not only were the servants invited, but the masters would serve the servants. The servants would be the guests. They'd serve a rich cake that had little tokens inside. Whoever got the slice of cake with the token in it, one for a man, one for a woman, would be the king of misrule and the queen of misrule for that day. The play was written in about 1600 or 1601, as near as we can tell, or so scholars guess, based on references in the play to things that would have been recent events. And scholars tell us that an Italian nobleman named Orsini visited London in late 1600, early 1601, and that possibly might have been the inspiration for Orsino. In 1602, a law student named John Manningham, who was staying in London at the time, wrote in his diary about attending a feast where the entertainment was a production of Twelfth Night. And in this zoom-in, you can see Manningham, it looks like he started to write, at our feast we had a play called Mid. He might have been thinking of A Midsummer Night's Dream instead of Twelfth Night, but he crosses out the word mid and writes Twelfth Night. Manningham says that this play reminds him of Shakespeare's earlier play A Comedy of Errors, which features not one but two sets of separated identical twins. And he also notes similarities with an ancient Roman play and a more recent Italian play. Now, to understand why the audience would have enjoyed seeing Malvolio humiliated, bullied, would you say, we need to see him in context. Now, you're already familiar with the dynamic of free spirits who are likable but kind of clueless, and they do little things that annoy an uptight know-it-all. Okay? Bert gets annoyed by Ernie, and Cogsworth gets annoyed by Lumiere, and Bob the Tomato gets annoyed by Larry the Cucumber. But, these are all kinder dynamics in that these are really a duo. The two need each other and kind of complete each other. Malvolio is definitely the uptight straight man. We recognize that, but don't look for the other half of his duo, not in this Shakespeare play. Malvolio is never seen singing and out drinking with the other servants. He's a loner, he's a party pooper. That really marks him as other. In Elizabethan society, you were never alone, and perhaps that explains why the audience is meant to accept as just perfectly natural that Viola feels so strongly that she needs to attach herself to somebody else's household. In Act 2, Scene 3, we see Sir Toby carousing with Sir Andrew, and according to the dialogue, it's late at night, although again, the light, they would have been performing this play during daytime, and they could not have changed the lighting effects, so there's dialogue about how it's late at night. And they're calling for Maria to bring them wine, and the fool shows up, and they pay him to play music for them. Maria comes out, and she's mildly scolding Toby for his carrying on, just as she did in an earlier scene. And Maria is giving the news that Olivia has threatened to throw Sir Toby out, or to have Malvolio throw him out. And Toby doesn't seem to take her complaint very seriously because he keeps singing. Now Malvolio eventually comes out, and he starts upbraiding his social superiors, Sir Toby and Sir Andrew, for disrespecting the Lady Olivia's household, and they don't listen to him. And this seems really to be a miscalculation of Malvolio's, but when he realizes the lords are not listening to him, Malvolio kind of, he pulls rank. He turns on Maria and starts criticizing her. Now, what he says to Maria doesn't seem to be all that harsh. He complains she's supplying them with the liquor, the wine, that's causing them to misbehave. But when we look at Maria's reaction, we have to recognize that whatever he did, whatever he said, however it came across, has to motivate Maria from kind of dutifully bringing the message from Olivia, hey guys, you really got to calm it down. She's mildly scolding Sir Toby, saying you're goofing off a bit too much. But when Malvolio leaves, what Maria does is she starts plotting to get back at Malvolio. Now, in a production that I saw recently, the director had Maria come on stage for this scene and kind of mockingly deliver her message about she's reporting that Malvolio is going to come get you, and she was kind of like playing the good cop. But then, in this production, Sir Toby sweeps Maria up in his arms and starts singing and dancing with her, and she joins in. So that when Malvolio appears, he sees Sir Toby, Sir Andrew, the fool Feste, who's kind of a professional entertainer, and the servant who's just been sent out to calm things down. Maria is now goofing off with them. I think it helped the audience get that Maria, who, she's a trusted servant of Olivia, she's siding with the servants who are misbehaving in Olivia's house. It's consistent with the text that Maria is caught carousing with the others. It's consistent, but that was a director's choice. Nowhere in the text does it say Toby dances with Maria. What we can definitely get from the text is that when Maria first enters the scene, she's trying to calm the others down, but after Malvolio shows up to give exactly the same message, Maria is now masterminding a plot against Malvolio. Later in the play, and this would be a surprise to you if you haven't read ahead, Sir Toby actually marries Maria. Now that establishes, I think it's consistent with the idea of the Lord of Misrule, this chaos time, the fact that it's possible for a servant to end up married to a nobleman. This is Malvolio's dream, but it actually does happen to Maria. If you haven't read ahead, I'm guessing that that's a surprise, because there's really nothing in the dialogue that suggests Sir Toby and Maria are going to be a couple. So the actors playing Sir Toby and Maria, they know that they have to prepare the audience to accept that Maria and Toby are going to end up together. They also need to deal with the fact that Maria is planning she has to have a motive for planning revenge against Malvolio. And on the surface, Malvolio and Maria are on the same side. They're both telling Sir Toby and Sir Andrew to calm down. So having Toby grab Maria during the scene and start whirling around dancing with her, it was a perfectly acceptable directorial choice. But in an English class, we can't use the detail that Sir Toby grabs Maria and dances around the room. We can't use that as a detail to prove anything else about this play, because it's not in the text. Whenever any particular action is really important to the scene and crucial to the scene, Shakespeare will actually have the characters talk about it. So here's something that, even though there isn't a stage direction, I would say any good production of Twelfth Night will have to include these details in the scene. Malvolio enters in scene 5 talking to himself. He's fantasizing about a future in which he's married to Olivia, and he's talking down to Sir Toby in his fantasy. And that's when he finds the letter, in which we know Maria has counterfeited Olivia's handwriting. Now, remember that image of the stage. People will be watching this from far away, and it's not possible to have a close-up camera show what the actor is holding in his hand. So Malvolio narrates that he describes the handwriting. I'll talk a bit more about the handwriting in a bit. But at one point he describes that he sees a wax seal that bears his lady's mark. So you know what a seal is? In the olden days, back in the day, they didn't have store-bought envelopes that you would lick, and stick that way. They wrote on a piece of paper, and instead of having envelopes, they would just fold the piece of paper up. And they would seal it shut by putting a drop of wax, on the folded piece, and then they would have a ring or maybe a pendant that would have a symbol on it, so like a 3D shape. It might be their initials or some kind of family crest or whatever. And they'd stick it in the molten wax, or the slightly solidifying wax, so that it would bear an image. And so you'd recognize the seal of your friends like you recognize the avatar of your friend's social media posts. And you could also tell if the letter had been opened if that wax seal had been broken. So the seal didn't keep the letter from being opened, but if a servant handed you a letter that was sealed, you would guess that the servant hadn't read it. So anyway, so that's what this seal is. We listen to Malvolio assuring the audience that Maria has done a really good job counterfeiting a letter from her mistress. Now, as her maidservant, Maria would have access to Olivia's writing desk and could really easily fake this. So now about that handwriting. Now, your Aunt Martha wouldn't get this, but for the PG-13 interpretation, I'll point out the humor in having Malvolio pay extra attention to the way the letter writer forms the letters C, U, and T. And if you didn't get the joke, Andrew repeats those letters. Cut is a slang for a part of a woman's body. We'd add a letter to finish the term. If there are any 9-year-olds in your life, see if they don't giggle if you ask them what they think is going on when Malvolio talks about, thus she makes her great peas. Okay, just see if that causes 9-year-olds in your life to giggle talking about great peas. Okay, so far I have not said anything about the big development in Act 2, which is, of course, that the audience meets Sebastian, Viola's brother. If you hear people complaining about how literature way back in the day was sexist and stupid, show them this speech, in which Sebastian speaks of his supposedly dead sister. He says people say she looked like him and that she was beautiful. And he says, but though I could not with such estimable wonder overfar believe that, yet thus far I will boldly publish her, she bore a mind that envy could not but call fair. She's drowned already, sir, with salt water, though I seem to drown her remembrance again with more. Here we have, in the middle of a fluffy, silly comedy, we have a man dismissing reports that his sister was beautiful and choosing instead to praise her brain, and he's tearing up thinking of her. Shakespeare is using a man's tears to celebrate a woman's brain. Okay, I think that's pretty, that's pretty woke in terms of gender there. All right, so we don't know a whole lot about Shakespeare's personal life, but we do know he had twin children, a boy and a girl. He also had an older daughter. The twin boy died at about age 11. His name was Hamnet, actually, not Hamlet, but Hamnet. We don't know what Shakespeare was thinking about when he wrote these lines, and I do consider it a dangerous distraction to start speculating about what this fictional, that this fictional character represents some person from Shakespeare's actual life. That's the road to hell. Don't go down that road. But his art absolutely has to stand alone for an audience who wouldn't know all the details that I'm telling you. Still, if you have these extra details, we can perhaps understand a little bit more about Shakespeare's ability to observe human nature. We recognize he would have had the opportunity to closely observe a boy and a girl twin and observe what happens when one had to grieve over the other's loss. So, now I have a personal connection to this play because a few months ago, my daughter played Viola in a Pittsburgh professional production. Here she is on the left as Viola with Sebastian and Festi. Now here's Sebastian dragging Sir Andrew by the legs in a fight scene. Sir Andrew was played by a Seton Hill graduate named Matthew Henderson. He was a creative writing minor, I think. Malvolio was played by a 6'5", 6'6" actor who wore a top hat. So he's like 7 feet tall in his scenes. He was wonderful. Here he is discovering the letter with the other characters, hiding in plain sight, but Malvolio doesn't see them. The director chose to set his play in the Mediterranean around 1920 because why not? It was fun. It was visually interesting. Now, if you remember from Act 1, we're introduced to Orsino as he pines for love, and then we see Viola deciding to be his servant. And then when we first see them together, they're already best friends. We've been told that they hit it off together really well, but we don't see their meeting. Now, once when I was driving my daughter to the theater, I think she'd already auditioned, and this was the callbacks where she'd made the first cut, and this was the second round. And I asked my daughter why she thinks Viola falls in love with Orsino, since we don't see the scene where they meet. We just know there's a scene where she announces to the audience she's already in love with him. My daughter and the actor playing Orsino decided that when the audience first saw them together, I'm sure they were working with the director's agreement as well, but when the audience first saw them together, they'd already have established in-jokes and like a secret bro handshake, where the audience just knew that off stage these guys were best buds. And the actor playing Orsino in the opening scene, kind of established himself as handsy, not in a creepy way, but when he in that scene where he tells his servants, "If music be the food of love, play on," he would often sometimes just casually reach out and touch the actor playing Curio. Just reach out and touch him. He's not even looking at him and seeing what his reaction is. He just likes touching people. And the actor playing Curio kind of flinched every time. And then later, when we see Orsino and Cesario together, Orsino's patting him on the head, or patting her on the head, whatever, Viola on the head, punching her playfully in the arm, and just touching her. At one point, my daughter told me in rehearsal they experimented with having Orsino swat Cesario on the butt, just playfully, but I guess that didn't work out. That was not in the production that I saw. Here, Orsino is going off on one of his self-absorbed digressions, and again, having established he's the kind of person who likes touching people just casually, here he's just kind of leaned back on the bench where Cesario happens to be sitting. And it's perfectly natural in this scene for Cesario kind of just to be there as a backdrop, to be there as a backboard. Now, Orsino later asks Cesario whether he's ever been in love, and as these two men start talking about how men love, Viola gets lost in her story, and the actors decided to play it, that Viola, as she starts talking about what it was like to be in love, she just starts absently stroking Orsino's forehead and stroking his hair. And Orsino is settling back, and he's involved in the story too, and he just kind of starts to enjoy it just a little too much. And he reaches up his hand casually, and their hands touch, and then they freeze. And the audience laughs, and then they get up and they shake it off, and Cesario, man spreads on the bench, and they drop their voices and talk about what real men are like. And now the audience really seem to love that. Now, my daughter really kind of prides herself in walking like a dude. This is what she looks like without a Newsies cap on. So the audience would have first seen Viola looking something like this before she cast off her maiden weeds and disguised herself. Now, why is this important? Well, in Shakespeare's day, all the female parts were played by boys whose voices hadn't changed yet. So in the original production, Viola would be performed by a boy pretending to be Viola pretending to be Cesario, who at one point demonstrates what he would do if he were a man in love with Olivia. So there's a lot of very conscious play acting going on here, and Viola talks about that quite a lot. In this scene where Orsino asks for a particular song, and Festi sings one about a lover who kind of dies an exquisite death for love. In this production, the actor playing Orsino starts mouthing the words, and actually gets up at one point and he's like full-on lip-syncing and air guitaring, like Spanish classical guitar air guitaring. And you can see from the body language that Viola is just going, squee. She thinks it's adorable that Orsino is heart and soul living this experience. It's a song with lyrics about a man who's being killed by a cruel lover who doesn't love him back. So this is a moment, my daughter told me that she decided this is how she wanted to show the audience what she liked about Orsino. There isn't any textual evidence for that, not directly. But I think her reasoning is consistent with what we know about Orsino's attraction to music and flowers and stories. We believe I think textually we can understand he's the kind of guy who would throw himself into lip syncing. And that's a perfectly good way for an actor on stage to pick, that's one of the things that I like about him. Now, before I finish up, I want to talk about a scene that I didn't cover when we went over Act 1. The big plot twist that ends Act 1, of course, is that Viola does such a good job talking to Olivia about love that Olivia ends up falling in love with, well, not with Viola, but with Cesario, the boy that Viola's pretending to be. Now, we know Olivia is interested enough in Malvolio's description of this young man, who we later know is Cesario, that she wants to see him just based on how Malvolio describes him as a fair youth between boy and man. Olivia seems to be interested in that. And the textual evidence is really pretty strong that Olivia has to fall in love with Cesario in this scene. A little earlier in the scene, Viola says she doesn't want to go on with her speech. She doesn't want to start her speech unless she's sure she's delivering it to Olivia, who hasn't admitted to being the lady of the house. Olivia at one point says, skip the poetry, and Viola's a little peevish. She says, hey, I've taken great pains to con it. I mean, it's not only well written, but I've memorized it. Viola's got a job to do, and she wants to do it. She's very conscious of this being a performance. Now, Olivia has, as I mentioned, shown some mild interest in Cesario. When a frustrated Cesario says, "If I did love you in my master's flame, with such a suffering, such a deadly life, in your denial would I find no sense." And Olivia says, "Why? What would you?" In other words, what would you do? And Viola tells her exactly what she would do. And now, when my daughter delivers these lines, she put her leg up on the bench and kind of straddled the bench where Olivia was sitting and leaned into her, and she just really threw herself into these lines. My daughter really just, while Olivia is melting, Viola is throwing in there, "Cry out, oh, Olivia, oh!" And she's just punching those O's. And don't ask your Aunt Martha why, when Cesario punched those O's, why Olivia started fanning herself and why the audience started laughing. Viola finishes her speech, and she's in the production that my daughter was in. She was just behaving as if Cesario was thinking, "Okay, I did a pretty good job with that. That speech went pretty well." But Olivia is flustered and really trying to compose herself. The actress playing Olivia was acting like she was at a loss for words, and the only thing she could think of saying is, "What is your parentage?" And as soon as she delivered the line kind of like this, "What is your parentage?" As if she was like a middle schooler who someone came up to her and said, "How do you do?" And she says, "Yes," or something like that. Your crush asks you a question, you say something stupid. And then when Cesario leaves and Olivia quotes saying, "What is your parentage?" the actress playing Olivia did it like, "What is your parentage? Out of all the things that I could have said, that's what I said?" So those were specific choices of the actors in this production. Another actor might have imagined at that moment, Olivia shifts from being infatuated to really asking, "Well, is this person of my social class? Could I continue this relationship?" Maybe that's what is your parentage means. I think Olivia speaks to herself after Cesario leaves does definitely tell us that Olivia has fallen for Cesario. She mentions that she's caught the plague. So we know it happened quickly, and it had to happen during these scenes, during these lines. But individual actors could find different places where the actual, where the actual whammy hits, the actual moment where Olivia falls for Cesario. And by showing you these pictures and describing how these actors chose to do their jobs, my goal is not to sort of shut down other possible interpretations. Our job in this classroom is to study the text. So we privilege the script, while the job of a theater company is to make the script work for a particular live paying audience, an audience that hasn't sat through a college class on Shakespeare in context. The next play that we start up with, I'll introduce you to the main characters and the main plot as I did before, but I'm not going to do it in this level of detail because I kind of want you to start experimenting with finding your own way in, and I don't want to do too much of that work for you because that would take away, I think, from I'd be doing the same thing that No Fear Shakespeare would be doing by doing too much work interpreting the plays for you, and so be a little fearless. Don't worry about getting Shakespeare wrong. This is a learning environment. I don't expect you to know everything about Shakespeare that I know, and I expect you to make connections that I didn't think of and to make suggestions that I never would have thought of, and perhaps come up with meanings that I never would have bothered to come up with on my own. So that's what I want. I'm not asking you to come up with the one correct interpretation that I know and you can stop thinking about it. I want you to practice, and I want you to sort of politely disagree with each other. And that's what I'm hoping that you're enjoying in this class as you continue exploring Shakespeare in context in our class. So I look forward to more of your responses as the semester progresses.